The 6 months after Robert passed were the quietest of my life. The silence in our house, nestled by the shores of Blue Heron Lake in the Virginia mountains, was a physical presence, a heavy blanket that smothered all the familiar sounds of life. It was in the empty chair across from me at the breakfast table, its wood cold to the touch. It was in the vast, undisturbed space on the pillow next to mine. It was in the way the old floorboards no longer creaked under his heavy, confident footsteps. Robert had been my world for 50 years, my steadfast anchor, and without him the world felt muted. The vibrant colors of our life together faded to shades of gray. Our home, once a sanctuary of boisterous laughter and constant love, now felt like a grand empty museum dedicated to a life that was no longer mine. Each morning I'd force myself into a routine. I'd walk the grounds, a cup of steaming coffee warming my hands against the encroaching autumn chill. The path we'd worn down to the water's edge felt wider now, lonelier. I'd pass the old oak tree where he'd carved our initials inside a lopsided heart when we were just newlyweds, so full of dreams. I'd run my fingers over the weathered bark, trying to feel the echo of his touch. My walk would always end at the historic lodge Robert's grandfather had built, a beautiful rustic building of stone and timber that had hosted decades of community potlucks, town meetings, and summer camps. It smelled of old wood, fireplace smoke, and 100 years of memories. This land wasn't just property. It was a living scrapbook of our family's history, of our town's history. And now, the weight of its preservation rested solely on my shoulders. That responsibility was more than just the physical upkeep of the estate. It was a profound spiritual burden. In his final lucid days, Robert had sat me down in this very lodge with our lawyer, Arthur, and laid out the full extent of his life's work. I knew we were comfortable, of course. Robert was a prudent man, but I never concerned myself too much with the details of our family finances. That was his domain. I was utterly stunned to learn the estate, liquid assets and all, was valued at over $19 million. But the number came with a solemn request, a deathbed promise. "Eleanor," he had said, his voice a reedy whisper but his eyes clear and full of love. "This money, this land, it's not for us. It was never just for us. It's for this place, for this community that gave us so much. I trust you to protect it. Don't let it become something it was never meant to be." I took his words as gospel. This inheritance wasn't a lottery win to be squandered. It was a sacred trust to be honored. That's precisely why I kept the full extent of it a secret, especially from my son, Ethan. I loved my son with every fiber of my being, but ever since he'd married Brittany a few years ago, a subtle but undeniable shift had occurred. He was more concerned with appearances, with the relentless pursuit of a lifestyle that always seemed just beyond his grasp. Brittany was fiercely ambitious. I'd give her that, but her ambition had sharp, unforgiving edges. They lived in a world of quick profits, social climbing, and easy upgrades, a world that felt utterly alien to the one Robert and I had built on a foundation of patience, hard work, and quiet contentment. I told myself I would tell Ethan everything when the time was right, when his own grief for his father had settled, when I could be sure he understood the gravity of Robert's wishes. The phone rang on a Tuesday afternoon, its shrill sound an intrusion that shattered the heavy quiet. It was Ethan. My heart leaped. I hadn't heard from him in nearly 3 months, not since the flurry of formal activity right after the funeral had subsided. His voice on the line was unusually warm, almost effusively cheerful. "Mom? How are you doing?" he asked. We exchanged the usual pleasantries, the conversation feeling stilted and unnatural, like a poorly rehearsed play. Then came the surprise. "Listen, Brittany and I were thinking, we'd love to take you out to dinner. Just the 3 of us. There's a new place downtown, the Gilded Sparrow. I hear it's incredible." I was completely taken aback. Ethan was never one for grand gestures or fancy restaurants. "Oh, Ethan, that's very sweet, but you don't have to do that." "We want to," he insisted, his voice as smooth as polished wood. "We haven't had any real time together. We feel terrible we haven't been out to see you more. We'll pick you up Saturday at 7. He didn't leave much room for argument. After we hung up, I stood by the window, looking out at the calm, gray water of the lake. A tiny, fragile flicker of hope ignited in my chest. Maybe this was it. Maybe he was finally reaching out, trying to bridge the unspoken distance that had grown between us. Maybe he saw how lonely I was and wanted to reconnect. Maybe he was finally becoming the man his father always hoped he'd be. My heart fluttered with a hope I hadn't felt in months. But a colder, wiser voice in the back of my mind whispered a warning. Little did I know, accepting that dinner invitation wasn't just a mistake. It was stepping into a trap they had been setting for weeks. On Saturday, I found myself moving with a sense of purpose I hadn't felt in a long time. I took extra care in getting ready, a little thrill of anticipation running through me. I chose a simple navy blue dress, one of Robert's favorites, and the soft cashmere shawl he had bought me for our last anniversary. As I wrapped it around my shoulders, it still held a faint, comforting scent of his pipe tobacco in the outdoors, a ghostly embrace that both soothed and saddened me. I fastened the simple string of pearls he'd given me for my 40th birthday around my neck, my fingers fumbling slightly. When I caught my reflection in the bedroom mirror, I saw the undeniable lines of grief etched around my eyes and mouth, a roadmap of the heartache of the last 6 months. But for the first time in a long while, I also saw a hint of something else: anticipation. A nervous, hopeful light in my eyes. I chided myself for being foolish, but I couldn't help it. I allowed myself to believe, just for a little while, that this dinner was a turning point, a step back toward the family I missed so dearly. To pass the afternoon, I pulled out an old, heavy photo album, its leather cover worn smooth with time. I opened it on the living room coffee table, the pages whispering as I turned them. There was Ethan as a little boy, no older than 8, with a gap-toothed grin, beaming with pride as he held up a string of sunfish he'd caught from our dock. His father stood behind him, one hand on his shoulder, his face alight with love. There was another of him as a teenager, helping Robert reshingle the roof of the lodge one sweltering summer, both of them covered in sweat and sawdust but laughing, sharing a bottle of cold water. He had loved this place so fiercely once. He knew every trail in the woods, every hidden cove on the lake. What had happened to that boy? I gently traced the outline of his smiling face in the photograph, a familiar lump forming in my throat. I wanted that boy back. I hoped, with a desperate maternal ache, that tonight I might see a glimpse of him again. At 7 o'clock sharp, the crunch of tires on the gravel driveway announced their arrival. Their sleek black SUV was an imposing modern presence against the rustic backdrop of my home. The sound alone felt alien in the usual evening quiet. Ethan got out and walked around to open my door, a gesture so uncharacteristic and formal it felt entirely rehearsed. Brittany leaned over from the passenger seat, her smile bright, wide, and perfectly painted. But it was a smile that was all technique and no heart. It never quite reached her eyes. "Eleanor, you look wonderful," she chirped, her voice a little too loud. "That shawl is just beautiful on you." I murmured my thanks, settling into the plush leather seat. The car smelled of newness and money, a sterile scent that was the complete opposite of my life. As we pulled away, they kept up a steady stream of cheerful, surface-level chatter. Brittany did most of the talking, her words flowing in a relentless, polished stream. She asked about my garden, about my health, about how I was managing in such a big house all alone. Each question was coated in a thick, cloying layer of feigned concern. "We just worry about you, Mom," Ethan said, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. "It's an awful lot for one person to handle." The Gilded Sparrow was everything Ethan had promised, and everything I secretly dreaded. It was a world of hushed tones, low lighting, polished dark wood, and the quiet, rhythmic clinking of real silverware against fine china. A young hostess in a black dress led us to a secluded corner booth, cocooned from the rest of the dining room. It was the kind of place you went to for a quiet celebration, an anniversary perhaps, or a private business deal. For a fleeting moment I felt a sharp pang of guilt, a sense of betrayal to Robert's memory. He had always preferred simple, honest places, a local diner with a worn-out counter over anywhere that had linen napkins and a sommelier. But I pushed the feeling down, reminding myself to be grateful for the gesture, to meet them halfway. Ethan ordered a bottle of expensive red wine, a Cabernet Sauvignon whose name I didn't recognize, waving away my suggestion for just a glass of water. "Tonight's a celebration, Mom," he said with a broad smile. "A celebration of what?" I wondered, but I didn't ask. He poured the wine with a practiced, steady hand, his movements smooth and confident. As he filled my glass, Brittany placed her hand gently on my arm, her touch light but proprietary. "We're so glad we're doing this, Eleanor," she said, her voice soft and confiding. "There's something we've been wanting to talk to you about." And there it was. The other shoe. The real reason for the fancy dinner. The expensive wine, the sudden uncharacteristic affection. My brief, fragile hope began to dissolve, replaced by a familiar, cold sense of dread that started in the pit of my stomach. I took a slow sip of wine, its rich, complex flavor turning to ash in my mouth. But as the waiter turned away, I saw a look pass between Ethan and Brittany. It was just a flicker, a split second of shared understanding, a silent communication of a plan set in motion. It was the look of hunters closing in on their prey. And I suddenly realized with a sickening certainty I was the prey. The first course arrived, a delicate beet salad with crumbles of goat cheese and candied walnuts, artfully arranged on a stark white plate. It looked like a painting, but I knew I wouldn't be able to taste a single bite. The conversation, guided with the expert precision of a surgeon by Brittany, veered immediately toward my well-being, or rather my perceived frailty. "So how have you really been sleeping, Eleanor?" she asked, tilting her head with an expression of deep rehearsed sympathy. Her eyes, however, remained sharp and assessing. "The nights must be so long and quiet out there by the lake. It must get awfully lonely." "I manage," I said, keeping my voice even and my gaze steady. "I would not give them the satisfaction of seeing me crumble. The quiet has its own kind of company. I've lived there for 50 years, Brittany. I'm quite used to it." Of course, she said, nodding as if I'd made a profound point. "But we can't help but think about the future. About what's best for you in the long run. Honestly, your health and peace of mind are the most important things in the world to us." Ethan listened intently, swirling the dark red wine in his glass, letting his wife lay the intricate groundwork. It was a familiar dynamic, a dance I had seen them do many times before. Brittany was the strategist, the one with the sharp mind and sharper tongue, and Ethan was the willing accomplice, the dutiful son who could make her cold calculations seem like reasonable, loving concern. She began to tell a story about their friends, a couple whose elderly mother had recently downsized from her large family home in the suburbs into a lovely, secure, and vibrant condo community. She painted a vivid picture of a life of newfound freedom, liberated from the endless burdens of home ownership. No more leaky roofs to fix, no more sprawling lawns to mow, no more worrying about property taxes or unexpected maintenance costs. "She's so much happier now," Brittany concluded brightly, placing a hand on Ethan's arm. "She told us all that stress she never even realized she was carrying just melted away. She has a social club, a pool. It's been a complete rebirth for her." I meticulously pushed a single candied walnut around my plate with the tines of my fork. The implication was as subtle as a sledgehammer. "This house is not a burden to me, Brittany. It's my home. It holds my entire life. All of my most precious memories." We know," Ethan chimed in, finally speaking. His tone was a perfect imitation of gentle patience, the voice of a reasonable man dealing with a sentimental, slightly irrational elder. "And we would never, ever want you to leave. But we were thinking, what if there was a way to keep the home in the family, to honor all those memories, but take all the financial and logistical pressure off of you completely?" This was it. The pitch. I could feel the silken threads of the net tightening around me. Brittany leaned forward, her eyes gleaming with a predatory excitement in the soft candlelight. "Ethan and I have been doing some research, Eleanor. Just exploring some creative ideas. That property, especially the old historic lodge, has so much untapped potential. It's a hidden gem. We spoke to a friend of a friend who's a major player in the hospitality industry, and he thinks it would be the absolute perfect location for a boutique wellness retreat. Think small, exclusive weddings, high-level corporate getaways, yoga and mindfulness weekends for wealthy clients from DC and Richmond." She spoke with a breathless passion, as if she were unveiling a brilliant, original idea that was designed solely for my benefit. She described it all in vivid, corporate-approved detail, the restored lodge becoming a main reception and dining area, the construction of 10 new luxury guest cabins along the shoreline, the installation of a gourmet farm-to-table kitchen. She made it sound like a beautiful, profitable dream, but all I could hear was the screech of saws and the roar of bulldozers tearing up my gardens. All I could see were hordes of strangers walking the paths where Robert and I had held hands, laughing in the rooms where we had built our life, sleeping in the bed where he had taken his last breath. "This is Robert's legacy," I said, my voice barely a whisper, a knot of grief and anger tightening in my throat. "It's a family place. It's a community place. And it would stay in the family," Ethan insisted, his voice rising with a defensive edge. "It would be our family business. We would manage everything, Mom. You wouldn't have to lift a finger. It would generate a significant income stream, Eleanor. It would secure the property's future for generations to come." My main course arrived, a perfectly cooked piece of salmon resting on a bed of asparagus. The sight of it made my stomach turn. My appetite had completely and irrevocably vanished. The food sat on my plate, a cruel mockery of the pleasant family evening this was supposed to be. They had brought me here, to this beautiful, expensive restaurant, not to connect with me, but to methodically and politely dismantle my life, to sell me on the idea of turning my sanctuary into their next business venture. Her words were wrapped in silk, but they felt like steel. Then, just as the waiter cleared our plates and offered a dessert menu, Ethan cleared his throat and reached into the inner pocket of his suit jacket. My heart stopped. What he pulled out wasn't a family photo or a thoughtful gift. It was a betrayal in the form of a thick manila folder. Ethan placed the manila folder on the crisp white linen tablecloth. It landed with a soft, final thud that seemed to echo in the sudden, cavernous silence that fell over our table. The golden, ambient light of the restaurant, which had seemed so warm and inviting just moments before, now felt harsh and interrogatory. Everything inside me went cold. A chilling stillness that felt like the calm in the eye of a hurricane. "Mom," he began, his voice a carefully modulated performance of calm reason, as if he were explaining a simple household repair or a change in the cable bill. "We had Arthur's old partner at the law firm, a fellow named Mr. Gable, draw these up. It's just some basic legal housekeeping, really. A way to streamline things for the future." He opened the folder and turned it to face me. The top page was a stark, black and white document, filled with dense, intimidating legal text. My full name, Eleanor May Covington, was printed in bold at the top, a name I suddenly felt I had to defend. I didn't need to read the fine print, the convoluted clauses and subclauses. My heart, with a sickening lurch, knew exactly what it was. "This is just a simple deed transfer," Ethan continued, his eyes refusing to meet mine, instead focusing on a point somewhere over my shoulder. He was a coward. He couldn't even look at me while he was trying to take my home. "It puts the property title in my name. It's purely for logistical and tax purposes. It will make it so much easier for us to manage the property taxes and the insurance, which are getting quite expensive. And, for legacy planning, it's really the smart thing to do." Brittany, sensing his wavering, immediately chimed in, her voice as smooth as cream, designed to soothe and reassure. "And of course, your right to live there for the rest of your life is fully and legally protected, Eleanor. Says so right there in Clause 4B. We highlighted it for you. We wouldn't change a single thing without your permission. This is just a formality, to tidy things up for everyone." A formality. Tidy things up. The words hung in the air, so carefully chosen, so utterly, despicably dishonest. They were trying to gift-wrap my own dispossession and hand it to me with a smile and a pat on the hand. My hands remained folded in my lap, clenched so tightly my knuckles were white. I didn't touch the papers. My gaze drifted from the offensive document to my son's face. He finally reluctantly met my eyes, and for a split second I saw a flicker of something. Was it shame? Or was it just impatience? A frustration that I wasn't making this easier for him? "What's the rush?" I asked, my voice surprisingly steady, though my heart was hammering against my ribs. Ethan let out a small, forced chuckle, a sound utterly devoid of humor. "No rush at all, Mom. But the end of the tax year is coming up, and Mr. Gable said it would be much cleaner, much more efficient, to get it done before then. And we've already spoken to a planning consultant," Brittany added quickly, leaning forward as if sharing an exciting secret. "Just preliminarily, of course. And she said the county is considering rezoning some of the Lakeside properties for commercial use. It would be wise to act before any of that changes the value or our ability to get the project approved." That word lingered between us like a foul odor. They wanted me to act. To sign. To surrender my home, my husband's legacy, the very ground beneath my feet, for their half-baked, greedy business dream. I slowly reached for the folder, my fingers trembling slightly. I lifted the top page. It was exactly as I'd expected. A quitclaim deed. A legal document designed for the swift and total transfer of property. It transferred full ownership, title, and all development rights to Ethan Robert Covington. I saw the highlighted line near the bottom, the one Brittany had so helpfully pointed out, granting me lifetime residency. I was to be a guest, a tenant in my own home. A gilded cage. I looked down at the final line on the page. A blank space waiting for my signature. Just one flick of a pen to give it all away. I let the paper fall back into the folder. I closed it with a soft final click. My breath was shallow, my chest painfully tight. I felt a sudden, overwhelming wave of exhaustion. So profound it was almost dizzying. I wasn't just tired, I was heartbroken. The little boy with the gap-toothed grin who loved to fish in the lake was gone forever. In his place sat this stranger, this man who saw his childhood home not as a place of love and memory, but as an asset to be leveraged. "I'm not feeling well," I said, my voice quiet but firm as I gathered my purse. "I think the wine was a bit much for me. I'd like to go home." Brittany's practiced smile didn't falter for a second. "Of course, Eleanor. We understand completely. We can talk about this another time." Ethan nodded, but I saw his jaw tighten, a muscle twitching in his cheek. The mask of loving concern on my son's face slipped, just for a second, revealing a flash of raw, ugly frustration. They walked me to the car in a tense, ringing silence, polite to the very end. But I knew this wasn't over. This was just the opening shot in a war I never wanted to fight. The 2 days following that disastrous dinner were a blur of shock and sorrow. The manila folder sat on my kitchen table like a coiled snake, a constant toxic presence. I couldn't bring myself to touch it, let alone open it again. I moved through my house like a ghost, the silence amplifying the frantic, panicked thoughts racing through my mind. What was I going to do? How could I fight them? I felt so completely and utterly alone. On the third day the phone rang. The caller ID showed Ethan's name. My first instinct was to ignore it, to let it ring until it stopped. My hand hovered over the phone, trembling. Part of me, a foolish maternal part, wanted to believe he was calling to apologize, to say it was all a terrible mistake. But the colder, wiser part of me, the part that had seen the look in his eyes at the restaurant, knew better. I took a deep breath and answered. "Hello, Ethan," I said, my voice flat. "Mom." "Hi. I was just calling to see how you were feeling," he said, his voice oozing a manufactured warmth. "You left so abruptly the other night, we were worried about you." "I'm feeling much better, thank you," I lied. "Oh good. That's a relief," he said. There was a pause, a carefully calculated beat. "So, listen, I know we threw a lot at you the other night. And I'm sorry if it felt overwhelming. We were just so excited about the possibilities, you know?" "I see," I said, refusing to give him an opening. "It's just, Brittany and I have been talking, and we really truly believe this is the best path forward for everyone. It secures your future, it secures the property's future. It's a win-win." He sounded like he was reading from a script, repeating the same hollow talking points from the dinner. "Ethan, I told you I needed to think," I said, trying to keep my voice from shaking with anger. I know you do," he said, his tone shifting, becoming more persuasive, more urgent. "But Mom, there is a bit of a time-sensitive element here. That planning consultant Brittany mentioned? She called us back. Apparently, the county board is voting on the rezoning issue in their next session, which is in 3 weeks. If we don't have the paperwork filed before then, we could miss our window. The whole project could be dead in the water." It was a lie. I knew it in my bones. It was a classic high-pressure sales tactic, creating a false sense of urgency to force a quick decision. He was treating me not like his mother, but like a reluctant client he needed to close. "This is a big decision, Ethan. It's my home." "Of course it is. And it will always be your home," he said, his voice rising in frustration. "Why can't you see that we're trying to help you? We're trying to build something for this family. For you. Dad would have wanted this. He was a practical man. He would have seen the business sense in this." That was the final straw. Invoking his father's name, twisting Robert's memory to serve his own greed. It was a desecration. A cold, hard fury unlike anything I had ever felt before rose up inside me. burning away the shock and the sorrow. "Do not," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "presume to tell me what your father would have wanted. You have no idea." There was a stunned silence on his end. I had never spoken to him like that before. "Mom, he stammered. "I will think about it, Ethan, and I will let you know what I decide. Do not call me about this again." "I will call you." Before he could respond, I hung up the phone. My hand was shaking, but not from fear. It was from rage. The line had been drawn. He had made it clear that he would lie, manipulate, and pressure me to get what he wanted. My son, my own flesh and blood, had become a stranger to me. A hostile force I now had to defeat. The call hadn't broken me. It had solidified my resolve. The time for grieving was over. The time for fighting had begun. After that phone call with Ethan, the house felt different. The lingering shock and sorrow had been cauterized by the clean, hot fire of my anger. The oppressive silence was no longer empty. It was filled with the frantic whirring of my thoughts as I tried to formulate a plan. I felt like a cornered animal, my instincts screaming at me to find a way out. I was no lawyer. I was no businesswoman. I was just a 70-year-old woman who had spent her life building a family, only to find herself forced to defend her home against it. I told myself I was being overly dramatic. Maybe they really thought this was what was best for me. Maybe they were just clumsy and insensitive in their approach. But my gut, a place of deep primal knowledge that had guided me through 50 years of marriage and motherhood, told me otherwise. It wasn't just the request. It was the chilling sense of finality in their tone, the way they looked at me as if the deal was already done, as if my signature was a mere formality they had to patiently endure. It was the calculated cruelty of Ethan's pressure call, using a fabricated deadline to try and box me in. Needing to feel grounded, to connect with something real and solid, I decided to build a fire in the living room fireplace. Robert and I had spent so many evenings there, the crackle of the flames a comforting soundtrack to our quiet companionship. As I knelt on the hearth to arrange the kindling, my eyes scanned the familiar objects on the mantel above. It was cluttered with a lifetime of memories. A piece of sun-bleached driftwood Robert had found on a long-ago trip to the coast, a small chipped porcelain bird I'd had since I was a girl, and a collection of treasured framed photographs. My eyes moved across the familiar arrangement, and then I froze. Something was profoundly wrong. My gaze darted back and forth, my mind refusing to process what my eyes were seeing. There was an empty space, a glaring vacant spot right in the center of the display. A photograph was missing. It was my favorite one, a beautiful silver-framed picture of Robert and me, taken just last year by a friend on our 50th anniversary. He had his arm wrapped tightly around me, and we were both laughing, our faces crinkled with a half-century of shared joy. The blue expanse of the lake sparkling behind us. It had been right there, in the place of honor. Now it was gone. My heart hammered against my ribs with a painful, suffocating force. I scrambled to my feet, my hands flying to the nearby tables, the bookshelves, my mind racing. Maybe I had moved it for dusting and forgotten to put it back. But I knew I hadn't. I was meticulous about these things. I searched the drawers of the sideboard, my movements becoming more frantic. It was nowhere. And then I knew. With a cold, sickening certainty that made the blood drain from my face, I knew they had taken it. During that brief moment at the beginning of that terrible evening, when I had left the room to get my shawl before we left for dinner, one of them must have slipped it into a pocket or a purse. It was the only possible explanation. It was such a small thing, a single photograph in a silver frame. But it was an act of such calculated psychological cruelty it took my breath away. It was a message. A deliberate, vicious statement. They weren't just trying to take my future. They were actively trying to steal my past. They were erasing me, piece by piece, from my own home, from my own life, even before they had the legal right to do so. Staring at that empty space on the mantel, a cold, hard resolve settled in my heart, displacing the last vestiges of grief and fear. They had made a critical, fatal miscalculation. They thought they were dealing with a frail, sentimental old woman. They forgot I was Robert's wife, and I had learned from the best how to fight for what I love. For the next few days, a heavy, oppressive quiet settled back over the house. But this time it wasn't the quiet of grief. It was the tense, charged silence of a battlefield before the first charge. The missing photograph had been a declaration of war, and I was now on high alert. I barely ate. I slept in fits and starts, waking from nightmares where I was lost in my own home. The walls covered in charts and graphs, my son's voice echoing in the halls, talking about profit margins and maximizing assets. I knew they would be back. They wouldn't give up that easily. I spent my time going through Robert's old files, trying to understand the legal complexities of the estate, but the impenetrable jargon was overwhelming. I felt isolated, outmatched, and terribly alone. On Saturday morning, I forced myself to drive into town for groceries. I knew I couldn't become a hermit. That's what they wanted. Our little town of Blue Heron Creek was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where a trip to the market was as much a social event as it was an errand. Normally, I loved the familiar greetings, the friendly chats in the aisles about the weather or the high school football team. But today, something was different. The air itself felt charged. I noticed it right away. A few people who would normally wave from across the store and call out my name just gave me a quick, tight-lipped nod and then looked away, suddenly fascinated by a display of apples. Carol from the bakery, who always had a booming laugh and a piece of gossip for me, just gave me a small, sad smile that looked more like pity than friendship. I felt a prickle of unease crawl up my spine. I tried to shake it off, telling myself I was being paranoid, that my own anxieties were coloring my perceptions. But then, as I was standing in the produce section, trying to decide between sweet potatoes and butternut squash, my old friend Margaret came up beside me. We had known each other for 40 years. Our children had grown up together, playing in the lake on hot summer days. "Eleanor, dear," she said, her voice uncharacteristically low, her eyes full of a troubled concern that made my stomach clench into a tight, cold knot. "Margaret, it's so good to see you," I said, forcing a smile that felt brittle and fake. She didn't return it. She glanced around nervously, as if worried we'd be overheard, then gently steered me toward a quieter corner near the bulk bins of nuts and grains. "Eleanor, I don't mean to pry," she began, her words hesitant as she wrung the handle of her shopping basket. "But is everything all right? With you, I mean." "I'm fine, Margaret. Just adjusting, you know. It's been a difficult time." She looked pained, as if she were about to deliver terrible news. "It's just, well, I was at my book club meeting the other night at the library. Brittany was there. And she was talking." "Talking about what?" I asked, my voice coming out sharper than I intended. Margaret took a deep breath. "She was telling everyone how worried she and Ethan are about you. She said that since Robert's passing you've been very confused. Forgetful." My grocery list slipped from my numb fingers, fluttering to the linoleum floor. "She told a story about you supposedly forgetting to turn off the stove one afternoon, and another about you getting lost on one of your regular walks in the woods. She said you're not well, Eleanor. She made it sound like you're not capable of managing the estate on your own anymore, that it's all become too much for your mental health." The air left my lungs in a silent gasp. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store seemed to hum and flicker, the bright colors of the produce blurring at the edges. A wave of hot, sharp humiliation washed over me, so intense it made my cheeks burn, followed by a wave of pure, unadulterated rage. It all clicked into place with horrifying clarity. This was their strategy. This was their next move. If I wouldn't willingly sign the papers, they would create a public narrative in our small, tight-knit community that I was no longer competent to make my own decisions. They were laying the groundwork, poisoning the well, so that when they eventually made a move for conservatorship, everyone would just nod along, thinking it was for my own good. I looked at Margaret's worried face, at the genuine pity in her eyes, and I knew Brittany's poison was already spreading. They weren't just trying to take my home. They were trying to take my name, my sanity, my very identity. That's when I knew I couldn't just defend. I had to attack. Okay, I have to pause here for a second. What would you have done in my shoes? To have your own child not only try to take your home, but also spread vicious rumors about your mental health to your friends and neighbors? I honestly want to know. Let me know in the comments how you would have reacted. I drove home from the market in a complete daze, my mind reeling, the untouched groceries sitting forgotten on the passenger seat. The humiliation I felt standing there in the middle of the store had burned away, leaving behind something hard and cold and dangerously clear: fury. But this wasn't the hot, messy kind of anger that makes you scream and break things. This was a focused, glacial rage, the kind that sharpens your senses and clarifies your purpose. They had underestimated me in the most profound way possible. They saw me as a relic, a sentimental old woman who could be easily manipulated with a fancy dinner or, failing that, discredited with a few vicious whispers. They had forgotten that I had run the town's literacy program for 20 years, that I had managed budgets, written complex grants, and navigated the thorny landscape of small-town politics with a quiet determination that Robert had always laughingly called my velvet hammer. I got home and walked straight to the phone on the kitchen wall. My hand was already reaching for the receiver when I heard the sound of a car. I instinctively peeked through the kitchen curtains and saw Brittany's familiar white sedan parked just down my gravel path, partially hidden by the thick hedge that separated my property from my neighbor's. She must have thought I was still in town, making my slow, elderly way through my errands. She was outside, pacing back and forth along the edge of the woods, her phone pressed tightly to her ear. She was so engrossed in her conversation, her posture so rigid and tense, that she didn't even glance toward the house. Normally, I would have turned away, respecting her privacy no matter how much I despised her. But after what Margaret had just told me, all sense of decorum, all notion of polite behavior, had utterly vanished. I was done being polite. I moved silently to the kitchen window and cracked it open just an inch, enough to let the sound in. The crisp November air carried her voice to me as clearly as if she were standing in the room. Her tone was all business, sharp, clipped, and utterly devoid of the sweet concern she had used on me. No, the initial approach was too soft, she was saying, her voice laced with impatience. Ethan is too sentimental. He gets bogged down in the emotional aspect. We need to accelerate the timeline. There was a pause as she listened. The investors are getting impatient. They need a firm commitment, and we can't give them that until the asset is secured. Investors. The word hit me like a physical blow. This wasn't just some half-baked family business idea. They had already brought in outside money. They had been selling my home before they even owned it. Listen, Mark, she continued, her voice dropping slightly, becoming more conspiratorial. The narrative is already in place. The community is sympathetic. They see a loving son trying to protect his ailing mother. It's a classic, respectable story. By the time we file for conservatorship, it will just seem like the logical, responsible next step. No one will question it. Conservatorship, the legal term for stripping someone of their autonomy, their finances, their right to make their own decisions. They were going to try to have me legally declared incompetent. My own son was going to stand up in a court of law and claim his mother was mentally unfit to control her own life. I leaned heavily against the counter, my knuckles white, my heart thudding a slow, heavy, painful rhythm against my ribs. I couldn't breathe, but I forced myself to keep listening. This was intelligence I needed. Once we have control of the asset, she said, the name of her project sounding like a curse, we can move forward with the full proposal for the Blue Heron Wellness Retreat. We'll even play up the legacy angle for PR. We'll name a wing after her or something. The Eleanor Covington Center for Serene Living. It's perfect for the marketing brochures, appeals to the high-end clients. They love that kind of stuff. A heartwarming story. She was going to use my name, my history, my very life as a branding tool for the business she was trying to steal from me. It was monstrous. It was diabolical. And it was, I had to admit with a shudder, brilliant in its absolute cruelty. She had thought of everything. She ended the call, got back in her pristine car, and drove away, never knowing I had heard every last damning word. I stood motionless by the window for a long time, the cold air from outside washing over my face. The shock faded and the icy rage returned, but now it was forged into something new, something unbreakable. It was resolve. She called me the final piece of the puzzle. She had absolutely no idea that I was about to flip the whole board over. The game was on and I was about to make my first move. I didn't waste another second wallowing in shock or anger. The time for that was over. Brittany's phone call had been a gift, a perfect, unvarnished glimpse into her dark, calculating mind. It had given me the one thing I desperately needed, clarity. I walked with a new, determined stride into Robert's old study, a room I had mostly avoided since his passing. Today, however, it felt like my command center. My movements were precise and deliberate. The feeling of being a victim, of being outmaneuvered and lost, was gone. Now I was a general planning a campaign. I went straight to the roll-top desk, a magnificent piece of oak that had been in his family for generations. I opened the bottom drawer and pulled out his old leather-bound address book. My fingers, steady now, flipped through the worn pages until I found the name I was looking for. Arthur Jennings. Our lawyer for over 40 years, and one of Robert's closest and most trusted friends. He had retired last year, moved to a quieter town up north to be closer to his grandchildren, but I prayed he would still take my call. He answered on the second ring, his voice as calm, steady, and reassuring as I remembered. "Arthur," I said, my voice clear and strong. "It's Eleanor Covington." "Eleanor. It's wonderful to hear your voice, though I wish it were under better circumstances," he said kindly, his tone full of genuine warmth. "I was so sorry to hear about Robert. He was a good man, one of the best." "Thank you, Arthur." "He was," I said, a brief pang of sorrow cutting through my resolve. "I'm sorry to bother you in your retirement, but I'm in trouble. I'm in serious trouble and I need your help." I spent the next hour on the phone with him, laying it all out in meticulous detail. The dinner, the deed transfer papers, the missing photograph from the mantel, the vicious rumors Brittany was spreading throughout town, and finally the horrifying phone call I had just overheard with its casual talk of investors, marketing strategies, and conservatorship. I didn't cry. My voice didn't waver once. I presented the facts as clearly and concisely as if I were delivering a report. When I finished, there was a long, heavy pause on the other end of the line. It wasn't the pause of surprise but of deep, weary knowing. "I'm not surprised, Eleanor," he finally said, his voice heavy with disappointment. "I saw this ambition in that young woman the day Ethan brought her home. Robert saw it too. We just hoped we were wrong." He sighed, a sound of frustration. "And they went to my old firm? To my former partner, Gable? That's low even for them. He knows better. What do I do, Arthur? Can they really do this? Can they have me declared incompetent?" The question, spoken aloud, sent a shiver of fear through me. "They can certainly try," he said, and I could hear the steel returning to his voice, the old courtroom warrior reawakening. "It's a nasty, ugly process, and they're counting on you being too intimidated and heartbroken to fight it. They are profoundly wrong. Your name carries more weight in that town than you know, Eleanor. You are respected. We'll fight them on the facts. But we shouldn't just play defense. We should go on the offensive. We need to build a fortress around that estate so strong they can never touch it, no matter what they try to pull." He then explained my options with perfect clarity. He told me about something called a community legacy trust. It was a powerful legal structure that would allow me to place the entire estate, the house, the lodge, the land, all of it, into a trust with a defined, legally binding and irreversible purpose. I could create a board of directors, and the trust's mission would be to use the property for community benefit, in perfect alignment with Robert's final wishes. "Once the property is in the trust," Arthur explained, "it no longer belongs to you as a private individual. It belongs to the foundation. You would be the chairwoman, of course, with full control over its direction, but no one, not Ethan, not a court, not a slick developer, could ever force its sale or transfer. It would be legally protected forever." A wave of relief so powerful it almost buckled my knees washed over me. A fortress. That's exactly what I needed. "And Eleanor," Arthur added, his voice firm, "don't forget about the $19 million. Robert left you that money not just as a cushion but as a tool. He trusted you to use it to protect his legacy. It's the fuel for this engine. We can use it to fund the trust's operations indefinitely, to show the court that this isn't just an idea, but a fully funded, viable, and immediate reality." He was right. The money wasn't just a secret. It was my secret weapon. They thought I was a poor, helpless old widow. They had no idea about the considerable resources I had at my disposal. We talked for another half hour, outlining the first critical steps. As we were about to hang up, Arthur said something that would become my mantra. Arthur's words were like a lighted match in a dark room. He said, "Eleanor, your name is the most respected in this town. It's time to remind them why." And I knew exactly who I needed to call next. After my call with Arthur, I felt a surge of purpose so potent it was like a jolt of electricity. The fog of fear and confusion had been burned away, replaced by a clear, sharp, unwavering focus. I was no longer a victim reacting to their attacks. I was a strategist building a proactive, impenetrable defense. I made a fresh pot of strong coffee and sat at my kitchen table with a notepad and pen. This very table, where Ethan and Brittany had arrogantly expected me to sign away my life, was now my war room. My first call was to Margaret. I apologized for my abruptness at the market and told her that something serious was happening, and that I needed her help, her discretion, and her strength. Her voice was full of warmth and immediate, unquestioning loyalty. "Anything, Eleanor. You just say the word." I knew something was wrong. My second call was to Evelyn Reed, a retired history teacher in her 80s who had single-handedly founded our town's library and historical society. Evelyn was sharp as a tack, with a mind like a steel trap, and she knew the history of every family and every parcel of land in the county. She was a living archive, a fierce protector of our town's heritage, and her moral compass was as true as the North Star. My third call was to Sarah Chan, a brilliant woman in her late 60s who had run the most successful catering business in the region for 30 years before retiring. She was a financial wizard who had served as the treasurer for countless local charities and fundraisers, including the hospital board and the church restoration fund. She understood the language of money and power better than anyone I knew, and she could spot a fraudulent balance sheet from a mile away. I invited them all to the house the next afternoon. Not for tea and sympathy, I said clearly on the phone to each of them. For a council of war. They arrived the next day, right on time, bundled in their autumn coats, their faces set with serious purpose. I saw in their eyes that they knew this was important. I led them not to the formal living room, but to the grand main room of the historic lodge. I had spent the morning preparing it, building a roaring fire in the huge stone fireplace that was the heart of the building. The room was filled with a warm, crackling glow and the scent of wood smoke. This was the soul of the estate, the building Robert's grandfather had raised with his own hands from the very stone and timber of this land. It felt right to plan its defense from within its own strong walls. I didn't hold back. I laid everything out for them just as I had for Arthur. I spared no detail: the calculated cruelty of the dinner, the cold legality of the deed transfer papers, the petty theft of the missing photograph, the vicious, reputation-destroying rumors, and the horrifying, damning phone call I had overheard. As I spoke, I watched their expressions shift in stages, from deep concern to shocked disbelief and finally to a quiet, collective, simmering anger. When I finished, the only sound was the crackle of the fire. It was Evelyn who spoke first, her voice crisp and clear as a winter morning. "That woman, Brittany, tried to join the Historical Society board last year. I blocked her. I knew she was a viper then. She sees our town's history not as something to be cherished and preserved, but as a brand to be marketed, a commodity to be sold." Sarah Chan, ever the pragmatist, was already tapping her pen on her notepad, her mind clearly working. "A conservatorship is a very high legal bar to clear, Eleanor. It's not easy. They'd need documented medical proof, expert testimony. These rumors are their opening salvo, an attempt to build a public case before they even step into a courtroom. It's a classic corporate takeover tactic just applied to a family. Poison the well, discredit the leadership, then move in." Margaret, my dear loyal friend, reached across the heavy oak table and took my hand, her grip firm and reassuring. "She won't get away with it, Eleanor. This town knows you. We know your heart, and we know your mind is as sharp as ever. We will stand with you, every single one of us." For the next 3 hours we worked, a formidable team of 4. Guided by Arthur's advice, which I had written down in detail, we began to sketch out the legal and practical framework for the Blue Heron Legacy Foundation. Evelyn, with her encyclopedic knowledge, provided the historical context and the powerful stories we would use to define its mission statement. Sarah, the financial genius, began drafting a preliminary budget, outlining how we could use the interest generated from the $19 million to fund programs and maintain the property in perpetuity, creating an unassailable financial plan. Margaret, with her deep connections in every corner of the community, started a list of influential people whose public support we would need to enlist. As the sun began to set, casting long, dramatic shadows through the lodge's tall windows, I looked at the determined faces of these incredible women. They were the matriarchs of our town, the keepers of its conscience. They were the quiet, unassuming power that held our community together. As we sat there around that old oak table, A quiet, unshakable power filled the room. It was the power of history, of shared purpose, of righteous anger. Brittany thought she was fighting one old woman. She had no idea she was about to take on an army. The days that followed were a whirlwind of quiet, focused, and productive activity. Arthur was in his element, drawing up the official legal documents for the foundation with the speed and precision of a master craftsman. Our council of matriarchs met almost daily, our war room in the lodge buzzing with energy. We were building our fortress brick by legal brick, and with each signed affidavit and each drafted bylaw, I felt stronger, taller, more in control of my own destiny than I had in months. The suffocating fear that had plagued me was gone, replaced by a steady, humming energy. I hadn't told Ethan or Brittany anything, of course. I let them believe I was at home, alone and wavering, thinking it over, as my son had so condescendingly suggested. Let them get comfortable in their own arrogance. It would make their fall that much harder. The quiet, however, was broken on a Thursday afternoon. I was in the kitchen, looking over some of Sarah's brilliant budget projections, when a gleaming black luxury sedan I didn't recognize purred up my driveway. It moved with a silent, predatory grace. A man in an impeccably tailored, expensive-looking gray suit got out. He was handsome in a slick, soulless way, with perfectly coiffed hair and a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He looked like a shark that had learned how to walk and tie a Windsor knot. He strode to my front door with an air of unearned confidence and knocked 3 sharp, impatient raps. I took a deep breath, smoothed my apron and opened the door, making sure to keep the security chain latched. "Can I help you?" I asked, my voice polite but cool. "Mrs. Eleanor Covington?" he asked, his voice as smooth as polished stone. He didn't wait for my confirmation. "My name is Julian Croft. I'm a private real estate consultant." He held up a thick, glossy business card as if it were a royal decree. "I was hoping I might have a word with you. I have a client who has a very strong, very motivated interest in acquiring this magnificent property." My blood ran cold. This was their next move. When the son's feigned concern failed, they sent in the hired gun. They had hired a shark. "I'm sorry, Mr. Croft, but you've been misinformed. This property is not for sale," I said, my voice as firm as the old oak door. He didn't miss a beat. His smile widened, a condescending smirk. "Oh, I understand that's the official position. It often is, initially. But my client is prepared to make a very, very generous all-cash offer. An offer that would allow you to live out the rest of your years in absolute comfort and luxury, without any of the burdens of maintaining an estate of this considerable size." He leaned in slightly, his voice dropping into a conspiratorial whisper. "I understand there are some complicated family discussions happening. Sometimes a neutral third party can help streamline things, make it easier for everyone to see the most logical, most profitable path forward." He was talking down to me, using the same coded, insulting language as Brittany, hinting at my age and my supposed fragility. He was here to intimidate me, to make me feel small and overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the money and power he represented. "There is no logical path that involves selling my home," I said, my grip tightening on the door until my knuckles were white. "Now, I am going to have to ask you to leave my property immediately." His smile finally faltered, a flicker of genuine annoyance crossing his handsome face. He wasn't used to being dismissed. "Mrs. Covington, with all due respect, an asset of this value doesn't just sit. It's a waste of potential. It is in your best financial interest to consider this offer. My client is prepared to be very aggressive. It might be wise for you to take the easy way out now, before things get, well, needlessly complicated." The veiled threat was as clear as the glass in my window. Complicated. He meant the conservatorship. He meant the legal battle they were planning. He was the muscle they had brought in to scare me into submission before they played their legal trump card. "The only thing that's about to get complicated, Mr. Croft," I said, my voice as cold and sharp as the November wind whipping across the lake, "is your drive back out of here if you are not off my land in the next 30 seconds. His eyes widened slightly in genuine surprise. He clearly wasn't used to being spoken to this way by a woman he had already written off as a confused old lady. He straightened his expensive tie, gave a curt, dismissive nod and said, "I'll leave my card. In case you reconsider." He slid it through the crack in the door, and it fluttered to the floor inside like a dead leaf. He turned on his heel and walked back to his silent, predatory car without another word. I shut the door and bolted it, leaning against the solid wood, my heart racing. But it was a race of adrenaline, not fear. They were getting desperate. Their timeline was accelerating, and so therefore was mine. He left his business card on my floor. After he drove away, I picked it up, tore it slowly into 4 precise, satisfying pieces, and dropped it into the fire. The time for defense was over. It was time to deliver the final checkmate. Thank you so much for sticking with my story this far. Really means a lot. If you're still here with me on this journey, do me a favor and just type the number 1 in the comments so I know you're still listening. Your support is what keeps me going. Alright, let's get to the part you've all been waiting for. They showed up 2 days later on a Saturday, unannounced. I saw their SUV coming up the drive, moving slower this time, almost cautiously. I was sitting in my armchair reading and I felt a profound, almost serene calm settle over me. The final legal documents for the foundation had been signed, notarized, and officially filed by Arthur the day before. The fortress was complete. The drawbridge was up. All I had to do now was stand on the ramparts and watch their siege fail. I let them in. They came bearing gifts this time, a desperate, transparent attempt at a peace offering, an enormous exotic-looking orchid for me, and a box of gourmet pastries from a bakery in the city. The Trojan horse. They set their things down in the living room, their demeanor radiating a confident, patient warmth that was utterly false. They were here to close the deal, to finally get what they wanted. Mom, we didn't want to pressure you, so we gave you some space to think. Ethan began, perching on the edge of the sofa as if he were a visiting therapist. Brittany opened her sleek, silver laptop with a practiced flick of the wrist. We took the liberty of putting together a more detailed presentation for you, Eleanor. We realized after our dinner that perhaps we didn't do a good enough job of explaining the full vision. We want you to see it, to feel it, to understand just how incredible this project could be for all of us. For the next 20 minutes, I sat in my favorite armchair and silently, patiently, watched as Brittany clicked through a polished, professional PowerPoint presentation. It was a masterpiece of corporate propaganda. There were glossy architectural renderings of the new lodge, which looked more like a sterile glass and steel airport lounge than a historic mountain home. There were complex charts with dizzyingly optimistic projected revenue streams, colorful graphs showing market demand for luxury wellness retreats, and even video testimonials from 2 hospitality experts I was certain they had paid for. She spoke smoothly, her voice a hypnotic drone of corporate buzzwords: synergy, brand identity, curated guest experiences, maximizing shareholder value, monetizing underutilized assets. She never once used the word home. She never once mentioned my memories or Robert, or her husband's childhood spent on the very land she was now describing as an asset. She was selling a product, and that product was the hollowed-out soulless shell of my entire life. Ethan nodded along at all the right moments, adding comments here and there like a well-trained chorus. And see, Mom? The projections show it would be profitable within 3 years. It's a guaranteed success. It's a legacy for our children. Finally, the presentation ended. The last slide was a simple, elegant photo of the lake at sunset, with the words "The future is bright" typed in a flowing, inspirational script. Brittany closed the laptop with a soft, satisfied click. "So," she said, her smile wide and achingly expectant, "what do you think? Isn't it just an incredible vision?" Ethan reached into his briefcase and pulled out the same manila folder from the restaurant. This time he also produced a beautiful heavy fountain pen. "We can sign everything today, Mom. We can get the ball rolling. We can start this new chapter, all of us together." He placed the folder and the pen on the coffee table in front of me, a ceremonial offering. They both looked at me, their faces glowing with an almost unbearable mixture of greed and anticipated victory. They truly deeply believed they had won. They believed their slick presentation and their false promises had finally swayed me. They believed their campaign of whispers and intimidation had worn me down and left me with no other choice. I didn't say a word. I simply reached down beside my armchair, where a single plain white business envelope rested on a side table, picked it up. Their smiles faltered slightly, replaced by identical looks of confusion. I held the envelope out to them, Before I look at your papers again, I said, my voice clear and steady as a church bell on a Sunday morning, I think you should look at mine. Ethan took the envelope from my hand. He glanced nervously at Brittany, a flicker of genuine uncertainty in his eyes for the first time. He opened the flap. As he pulled out the single sheet of paper inside, I watched the color drain from his face. He went from confident to confused to completely chalky white. Brittany, impatient and annoyed, snatched the paper from his hand. I watched as her perfectly composed mask didn't just crack. It shattered into a million tiny, invisible pieces. They thought they were handing me a pen. I had just handed them a grenade. The document in Brittany's trembling hand was a single sheet of paper, but it carried the weight of an anvil, and it had just dropped on her entire world. It was the official legally filed notice from the Commonwealth of Virginia of the formation of the Blue Heron Legacy Foundation. It detailed in cold, inescapable legal language the irrevocable transfer of the entire Covington estate, the house, the lodge, the 200 acres of land, all of it, into the ownership of the newly formed community trust. It named the board of directors: Eleanor Covington, Evelyn Reed, Sarah Chun and Margaret Riley. And it explicitly stated the foundation's immutable purpose: to preserve the natural and historical character of the property for community enrichment and educational programs, in perpetuity. The final, damning sentence made it clear. The property could never be sold or developed for commercial profit. The silence in the room was absolute, a ringing void broken only by the soft, indifferent crackling of the fire in the hearth. Brittany stared at the paper, her face a grotesque mask of disbelief and incandescent fury. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air, but no sound came out. Her perfectly crafted world, her brilliant business plan, had just been utterly and completely annihilated. It was Ethan who finally broke the silence, his voice a choked, strangled whisper. What is this? A foundation? He looked up at me, his eyes wide with a desperate, childish confusion that would have been pitiable if it weren't so pathetic. Why? Why would you do this? Why didn't you talk to us? Why didn't you tell us? I finally allowed the full crushing weight of my grief and disappointment to show in my voice. I looked directly at my son, the boy I had raised, the child I had loved more than life itself, the man I no longer recognized. Talk to you, Ethan? I did. We sat in a fancy restaurant, and I listened for over an hour while you and your wife explained in meticulous detail how you planned to carve up my home and sell it off piece by piece to strangers. You didn't want to talk. You wanted me to sign. You sent a shark to my door. You called me to pressure me with lies. My voice grew stronger with every word, firmer with every truth I spoke. You have the audacity to talk about legacy. This is legacy. This is your father's legacy. He loved this town. He loved this land. He would have been horrified, absolutely sickened, to see it turned into a playground for rich people from the city. This foundation protects that legacy. It protects it from greed. It protects it from you. Brittany finally found her voice, and it was a venomous hiss. You can't do this. This is illegal. We had investors. We had a plan. We will sue you. Sue me for what, Brittany? I asked, my voice calm and cold. For donating my own property to a charitable foundation? For honoring my late husband's wishes? You are welcome to try. I assure you Arthur Jennings, who drafted these documents, is a far better lawyer than the one you hired. She stood up abruptly, her whole body rigid with a fury so intense she seemed to vibrate. She couldn't even look at me. She snatched her expensive laptop from the table and stormed toward the door without another word. Ethan remained seated, looking utterly and completely broken. He stared at the floor, then up at me, his face a tragic mess of shame, anger, and self-pity. I can't believe you did this to us, Mom. To your own family. This isn't something I did to you, Ethan, I said softly, the last of my anger draining away, leaving only a deep, profound sadness. This is something I did for this family. For your father's memory. And for myself. He finally stood, his shoulders slumped in utter defeat, and followed his wife out the door like a lost child. He didn't say goodbye. I listened to the sound of their SUV's tires spitting gravel as they sped away down the drive. A sound of angry final retreat. I was alone again in the quiet house. I walked over to the coffee table and picked up the glossy, bound presentation they had left behind. I flipped through the pages one last time. The sterile renderings, the meaningless charts, the hollow, empty promises. Then I walked to the fireplace and dropped it into the flames. As I watched their plans, their greed, their betrayal turn to black ash and smoke, I didn't feel triumph. I felt a profound, cleansing peace. I hadn't lost a son that day. I had merely accepted with finality the truth about the man he had become long ago. And for the first time in months, my house felt truly safely like home again. In the weeks that followed, a new kind of life began to bloom on the estate. We decided to launch the Blue Heron Legacy Foundation not with a stuffy, formal gala, but with a simple, heartfelt event at the lodge that was open to the entire town. There were no press releases sent to city papers, no fancy engraved invitations. Margaret, Evelyn, and Sarah, my formidable counsel, simply put the word out through the channels that truly mattered. The church bulletin, the library newsletter, the book clubs, the volunteer fire department auxiliary, and the powerful, unstoppable force of small-town gossip. We wanted it to be an event for the community by the community. On a crisp, brilliantly sunny Saturday in early December, the grounds of the lodge were filled with people. But these weren't investors in slick suits or developers with predatory smiles. These were the real people of Blue Heron Creek. Families I had known for generations, their children now with children of their own, played on the lawn. Former students from my literacy program, now successful adults, came up to hug me. Friends who had stood by me, sensing my struggle without even knowing the full, ugly story, were there, their faces beaming. They brought thermoses of hot cider, mulled wine, and plates of homemade cookies and brownies. The air, crisp with the promise of winter, was filled with the sounds of laughter, of children squealing with delight, and the warm, comforting hum of genuine connection. I stood on the wide wraparound porch of the lodge, looking out at the incredible sea of faces gathered below. My council of matriarchs stood beside me, their presence a source of quiet, unshakable strength. I had a few notes written down on a note card, but when I stepped up to the simple wooden podium we had set up, I put them aside and decided to speak from the heart. Thank you all, my dear friends and neighbors, for coming. I began, my voice amplified by a small speaker, carrying in the clear, cold air. Many of you have known me my whole life. You knew my husband, Robert. And you know how much we both loved this town, this lake, this land. I paused and looked out toward the lake, its surface a perfect, sparkling mirror of the bright blue winter sky. In recent weeks, I've been forced to think a lot about the meaning of the word legacy. It's a word that gets thrown around a lot. Some people think a legacy is about money, about property, about what you leave behind when you're gone. But I've come to believe that a true legacy isn't about what you leave behind at all. It's about what you pass forward. It's about the values you instill, the community you help to build, the opportunities you create for others to thrive. This land, this beautiful historic lodge, it was never meant to be a private treasure, locked away or sold off to the highest bidder. It was always meant to be a place of gathering, of learning, of quiet reflection for everyone. Robert believed that with all his heart, and I believed that. I took a deep breath, feeling the support of the crowd wash over me. That is why today we are officially launching the Blue Heron Legacy Foundation. As of this moment, this entire estate now belongs to a trust dedicated to serving this community. Its purpose is to protect this beautiful piece of our shared history, and to use its considerable resources to enrich our lives. I then announced our first official program, something Sarah and I have been working on tirelessly. The Foundation's first initiative, starting next month, will be the Eleanor Covington Empowerment Series, a set of free workshops specifically for the senior citizens in our community. We will offer classes on financial literacy, on understanding legal documents like wills and deeds, and on navigating the often confusing world of digital technology. Our goal is simple: to ensure that no one in our community can ever be taken advantage of, intimidated, or made to feel powerless because of their age. A wave of applause, warm, sustained, and genuine, rose from the crowd. It wasn't a thunderous, polite ovation. It was better. It was the heartfelt sound of a community embracing an idea, of people feeling seen, valued, and supported. As the applause echoed across the water, I saw Margaret wipe a tear from her eye. This was more than just saving a piece of land. This was the start of something new, something that would outlive all of us. But the story wasn't quite over. There was one final chapter left to be written, not by me, but by the town itself. Life settled into a new, peaceful, and wonderfully busy rhythm. The foundation's work became the center of my days, giving me a sense of purpose that I thought had died with Robert. The lodge, which for months had been a quiet, dusty monument to the past, was now filled with life and energy again. We held our first financial literacy workshop, and the turnout was so overwhelming we had to add a second session. Sarah Chun was a brilliant, no-nonsense teacher, breaking down complex topics like estate planning, reverse mortgages, and investment scams into simple, understandable terms. I watched women my age, women who had been taught that finance was men's work, and had been intimidated by it their whole lives, suddenly feel a sense of control and confidence. It was more rewarding than I could have ever imagined. I didn't hear from Ethan. Not a phone call, not a text, not a single letter. It was a profound and final silence. It was a silence that was no longer painful, just an accepted fact, like the changing of the seasons. I heard through the town grapevine, that unstoppable force of nature, that he and Brittany were keeping a very low profile. Their grand ambitions for a luxury retreat, and for their place in our town's social hierarchy, had apparently hit a rather large, unmovable obstacle named Eleanor Covington and her council of matriarchs. The final word on the matter, the definitive end to the story, was delivered right to my front porch one frosty Tuesday morning. It came in the form of the local weekly newspaper, the Blue Heron Chronicle, dropped off by the delivery boy. I unfolded it while sipping my morning coffee by the fire, expecting the usual news about the town council meeting, or the results of the high school basketball game. But there, on the front page, was a headline that made me stop breathing for a second. Lakeside Wellness Retreat Project collapses amid funding issues. Widespread community concerns. The article, written by a sharp young reporter, was short but devastatingly precise. It detailed how a proposed high-end development project, led by local residents Ethan and Brittany Covington, had officially been scrapped after failing to secure its final round of crucial investment. It quoted an anonymous source close to the investment group who mentioned growing concerns about the project's viability and the developer's inability to secure the primary property asset. But it was the second half of the article that truly sealed their fate and vindicated my fight. The reporter had spoken to several prominent town members about the proposed development. Evelyn Reed, identified as the head of the Historical Society, was quoted as saying, "Any project that doesn't respect the historical and communal nature of the Blue Heron Lake area would be a profound and unwelcome mistake." But the killer quote came from a local business owner who said, "Frankly, a lot of us were made uncomfortable by the proposal. We heard some very troubling rumors about how the developers were handling their own family affairs. And in a town like this, character matters." Brittany's own weapon, her vicious, calculated campaign of lies about my mental health, had backfired spectacularly. In our small town, where reputation is everything and secrets rarely stay secret for long, she had painted herself not as a concerned daughter-in-law, but as a ruthless, untrustworthy operator willing to destroy her own family for profit. The very community she had tried to manipulate had quietly and decisively rejected her. I slowly folded the paper and placed it on the table. There was no triumphant surge, no giddy feeling of revenge. There was only a quiet, deep sense of justice. A sense that the world sometimes, despite all evidence to the contrary, does right itself. The story concluded a few weeks later when I saw a for sale sign go up in front of Ethan and Brittany's large, new house on the other side of town. They sold it quickly and moved away, vanishing from our town as quietly and completely as they had tried to vanish me from my own life. They had tried to erase me from my own story. But they forgot one simple, powerful thing. I was the one holding the pen. In the aftermath of it all, after the for sale sign came down and my son and his wife were truly gone, a new kind of peace settled into my home, a peace I hadn't realized was possible. It wasn't the heavy, mournful silence of grief, but the light, breathing, expansive silence of contentment. The house felt fully mine again, not as a possession to be guarded, but as a cherished partner in this new unexpected chapter of my life. One day, while clearing out an old cedar chest filled with Robert's sweaters, I found a small, simple hand mirror he had given me years ago. It had a worn, smooth wooden frame, nothing fancy at all. He'd bought it for me at a local craft fair, saying he liked how it was honest and unadorned just like me. I decided to place it on the small table next to my armchair by the window, the spot where I drink my tea every morning and watch the world wake up. Now my morning ritual has changed. I sit with my steaming cup of Earl Grey, watch the mist rise off the calm surface of Blue Heron Lake, and I pick up that little mirror. I don't check for new wrinkles or count the gray hairs. I look directly into my own eyes, into the eyes of the woman who survived, the woman who fought back. And I ask myself a silent question. Did you show up for yourself yesterday, Eleanor? Did you live with truth and purpose? Most days now, I am happy to find that the answer is a quiet, confident yes. The foundation is thriving beyond my wildest dreams. The lodge is no longer a quiet, dusty building filled with ghosts of the past, but a vibrant, joyful hub of activity, filled with the chatter and laughter of women discovering their own strength and resilience. We share stories of hardship and triumph, we learn about finances and legal rights, we support each other through grief and celebrate new beginnings. These women, many of whom started as strangers to me, have become a new kind of family, a sisterhood forged in shared experience. I learned the hardest lesson of my life in these past few months. I learned that sometimes the people you love the most, the ones you would give your life for, will be the ones who fail you most profoundly. I learned that you can spend your whole life waiting for someone else, a husband, a child, to see your worth, but your life doesn't truly begin until you finally see it for yourself. Letting go of the son I thought I had wasn't about losing him. It was about finally, clearly, seeing the man he had become and choosing, without guilt or hesitation, to save myself instead. If you have ever been overlooked, underestimated, or made to feel small and powerless in your own story, I hope my journey reminds you that your voice matters, and your strength is far greater than you know. It is never ever too late to pick up the pen and write your own ending. What battles have you had to fight to protect what you love? Share your stories in the comments below. Let's remind each other that we are not alone in these struggles. And please, if this story touched you, give it a like and subscribe for more stories that remind us of the quiet, formidable power that lives in all of us. Thank you for listening.